Cleopatra VII, the last ruler of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, remains one of the most enigmatic figures in ancient history. Her reign, relationships, and death have captivated historians, artists, and writers for centuries. Cleopatra's dramatic and highly publicized life, which was marked by political alliances with two of Rome's most powerful men, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, culminated in her death under mysterious circumstances in 30 BC. Was her death a suicide, as tradition holds, or was she murdered, perhaps at the hands of those who stood to gain from her demise? To answer this question, it is necessary to explore the complex political context of her reign, the nature of her relationships with Caesar and Antony, the events surrounding her death, and the historical accounts left behind. This investigation will consider the two dominant theories about Cleopatra's death: suicide and murder, by examining both the primary ancient sources and modern interpretations of the available evidence. The political context of Cleopatra's reign. Cleopatra VII, born in 69 BC, was a member of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a family of Greek origin that ruled Egypt following the death of Alexander the Great. Though they ruled Egypt for almost 3 centuries, by the time Cleopatra came to the throne, the Ptolemaic dynasty was weakened by internal strife, external threats, and Roman interference. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII, had been a weak ruler, and upon his death in 51 BC, Cleopatra ascended to the throne. She was initially co-ruler with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was also her husband, in accordance with Egyptian tradition. However, the young queen's power was soon challenged by her brother and his advisors, leading to a civil war. Cleopatra's intelligence, charisma, and political acumen were instrumental in navigating the tumultuous political landscape of Egypt and Rome. Her relationship with Julius Caesar, which began in 48 BC, helped secure her position as sole ruler of Egypt after her brother's death. Caesar's visit to Egypt, following his pursuit of Pompey, marked the beginning of Cleopatra's involvement with Roman politics. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, Cleopatra turned to Mark Antony, one of the leading figures in Rome's post-Caesar political struggles. Antony and Cleopatra's alliance was both romantic and political, and they had 3 children together, which further cemented their relationship. However, their opposition to Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir and future emperor, eventually led to a military conflict. The final confrontation between Octavian's forces and the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra culminated in the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. Octavian's victory was decisive, and the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra marked the beginning of the end for both of them. The traditional account: suicide or murder. The traditional narrative of Cleopatra's death, as chronicled by ancient historians such as Plutarch, Dio Cassius, and Appian, holds that Cleopatra committed suicide in the wake of her defeat by Octavian. According to these sources, after Antony's death, Cleopatra took her own life in order to avoid capture and humiliation by Octavian. Most accounts suggest that she used a venomous snake, often identified as an asp, as the instrument of her death. Plutarch's account, written several decades after Cleopatra's death, is one of the most widely cited sources for the story of her suicide. According to him, Cleopatra, unable to bear the loss of Antony and facing the certainty of capture by Octavian's forces, resolved to die on her own terms. She reportedly summoned 2 of her attendants, who helped her prepare for the final act. In some versions, Cleopatra is said to have arranged for her servants to die alongside her, an act that could be seen as both a demonstration of loyalty and a final assertion of control over her fate. The choice of a snakebite as the method of her death was especially dramatic, given the symbolism of the asp in Egyptian culture, where it was seen as both a royal emblem and a lethal creature. In Plutarch's telling, Cleopatra's death was followed by a sequence of tragic events. Upon hearing of Cleopatra's death, Antony, who had fallen on his own sword in a failed suicide attempt, requested to be taken to her. He died in her arms. The loss of both leaders was seen as the final blow to Egypt's independence. The case for suicide theory that Cleopatra committed suicide has long been the dominant interpretation, and there are several reasons for this. First and foremost, the choice of suicide fits with the narrative of Cleopatra as a ruler who valued her dignity and power above all else. Throughout her life, Cleopatra demonstrated a remarkable ability to control her own destiny in the face of overwhelming external pressures. She was a master of political strategy, and her relationships with Caesar and Antony were both personal and politically motivated. In this light, her death could be viewed as the ultimate act of agency, a final refusal to submit to a foreign power after her kingdom's defeat. The concept of suicide as a means of maintaining honor and dignity was not foreign to the ancient world, particularly in the context of royal and aristocratic life. In many cultures, suicide was considered an acceptable way for a noble or a ruler to avoid the humiliation of capture or disgrace. Cleopatra's decision to end her life rather than be paraded in Octavian's triumph could have been seen as a way to preserve her honor and control her narrative. In a world where political and personal power were deeply intertwined, Cleopatra's suicide could be interpreted as a final act of resistance against the forces that sought to strip her of her autonomy. Moreover, Cleopatra's relationship with Mark Antony may have influenced her decision to end her life. The historical sources suggest that the two were deeply in love, and Cleopatra's grief at Antony's death would have been profound. She had already lost her political power and her kingdom, and Antony's loss might have made life unbearable for her. In this context, her suicide could be seen as an act of shared destiny with Antony, as they had long been allies in both love and politics. The case for murder. While the traditional story of Cleopatra's suicide is widely accepted, there are compelling arguments that suggest her death may have been the result of murder rather than self-inflicted harm. These theories primarily point to the motivations of Octavian, who had both political and personal reasons to ensure Cleopatra's death. Octavian's rise to power after Caesar's assassination was marked by ruthless political maneuvering. His defeat of Antony and Cleopatra at Actium and the subsequent consolidation of power left him with little tolerance for any threats to his rule. Cleopatra's continued existence, particularly given her role as the mother of Caesarion, who was claimed to be Caesar's son, could have posed a potential challenge to Octavian's authority. By eliminating Cleopatra, Octavian would have ensured that no rival claimant to Caesar's legacy remained, particularly in Egypt, which was a wealthy and strategically important province. One of the most convincing arguments for murder is the fact that Cleopatra's death occurred so suddenly and with so little warning. Ancient sources suggest that Cleopatra died almost immediately after her suicide, raising questions about the likelihood of a quick and painless death by snakebite. Poisoning was a well-known method of assassination in the ancient world, and Cleopatra may have been killed by poison rather than a snakebite. Ancient historians often romanticize the deaths of important figures, and the story of the asp could have been an invention designed to give Cleopatra's death an air of tragic grandeur. It is also worth noting that Cleopatra was not the only ruler to face the possibility of assassination. Throughout the ancient world, kings, queens, and other powerful figures were often the targets of assassination plots, both from internal rivals and external powers. In the case of Cleopatra, Her defeat at Actium and the loss of Egypt to Roman control would have made her a prime target for assassination by Octavian or his agents. The role of historical source and of the challenges in determining whether Cleopatra's death was suicide or murder is the reliability of the ancient sources. Most of the surviving accounts of her death come from Roman historians who wrote decades after the events in question. These authors such as Plutarch, Dio Cassius, and Appian had their own political agendas, and their portrayal of Cleopatra's death may have been influenced by their views on Rome's rise to power. On the other hand, the Roman historians' portrayal of Cleopatra's suicide also serves to reinforce the idea of Rome's superiority. By depicting Cleopatra as a queen who chose to die rather than face humiliation, the Roman sources may have sought to portray her as a noble but defeated rival, further solidifying Rome's triumph over Egypt. The death of Cleopatra remains one of history's most compelling and tragic mysteries. The traditional account, which suggests that she committed suicide after the defeat of her forces at Actium, is both dramatic and fitting in the context of Cleopatra's life. As a ruler who prided herself on her intelligence, power, and independence, Cleopatra's suicide could be seen as the ultimate act of agency, allowing her to control her own fate rather than face humiliation at the hands of Octavian. However, the possibility of murder, particularly at the hands of Octavian, cannot be dismissed. Octavian had political reasons to eliminate Cleopatra, and the rapidity of her death, along with the timing of her demise, raises questions about the authenticity of whether Cleopatra's death was a tragic suicide or a carefully orchestrated assassination. The result was the same: Egypt became a Roman province, and Cleopatra's legacy was forever intertwined with the rise of Rome as the dominant power in the ancient world. In the end, the mystery of Cleopatra's death reflects the complexity of her life. As a queen who navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics, who had relationships with two of Rome's most powerful men, and who faced the collapse of her kingdom, Cleopatra's death is a fitting conclusion to a life filled with intrigue, drama, and historical significance. While the true nature of her death may never be known for certain, the fascination with her life and death ensures that Cleopatra will remain one of history's most captivating figures.